Welcome back to the cryptowrld channel, everyone. My name is Josh, and today $140 million worth of Bitcoin has just been sold in the form of Bitcoin short positions. So I'll be covering that and so much more later in the video, but first let's take a quick look at the 4-hour Bitcoin chart. And if you're looking in the VPVR indicator, this gives us a good sense of where the major support is, at least in the shorter term on these smaller timeframes, and also the major resistance as well. And it is important to mention that these levels of support and resistance are only meant for this 4-hour time frame. So if you're looking at the daily charts, for example, we would have slightly different levels of support and resistance to pay attention to. But anyway, at the time of recording, Bitcoin is running into this major point of support starting at around 39.3k approximately. And this area of support is ranging down towards around 37.8k. And as for some resistance, if we do see a bit more of a bounce here, that is starting at around 41,500 and going up towards around 44,000 approximately. But remember, these levels are mostly important for these shorter term trends in the markets that we have seen over the past 2 months approximately, and these shorter term trends normally last for around 1 to 2 weeks, at least so far. And what has been very interesting is when the Bitcoin price is towards the bottom of these shorter term trends, just before some more bullish price action, right towards these lows, we normally see extreme fear in the Bitcoin Fear and Greed Index, and that is what we are seeing right now. So basically, the further we go into extreme fear, the closer we are to some sort of local Bitcoin bottom. But if you're zooming out to the 12-hour Bitcoin chart, what we're seeing right here is the parabolic stop and reverse indicator still in the green for another day, but the price oscillators on the 12-hour chart aren't really doing that much. You could make the argument that the 12-hour RSI is forming some higher lows, which could be a bullish signal, but at the same time, it hasn't really formed a higher high. It has actually been forming lower highs, which means as of right now, according to the 12-hour Bitcoin RSI, the market is very indecisive, and that is also backed up by the 12-hour Bitcoin MACD, because if you're looking at what we've seen over the past couple of days, we've seen just about nothing. There's been almost zero momentum over the past couple of days to either direction. And so according to these 12-hour Bitcoin price oscillators, one of the most probable outcomes from here is most likely going to be some more sideways consolidation on this 12-hour chart. And of course, this sideways consolidation will most likely contain some smaller fluctuations in the price of Bitcoin. And that would likely continue to be the case while the price oscillators on this 12-hour chart aren't really doing that much. And then when we eventually start seeing some more momentum kick in to either direction, that's when we can be more confident that another trend is starting to form. For example, over the past couple months, it's been pretty easy to spot trend reversals here in the shorter term because we have been seeing some decent momentum to the upside and to the downside on these smaller timeframes. But as I just said, right now, over the past 1 to 2 days, it's gone pretty much exactly flat. Now, if you're zooming out to the daily Bitcoin chart, technically speaking, we're still in this higher low structure, which is technically a bullish structure. Technically speaking, the only thing bearish about this price structure on the daily time frame is the fact that we recently formed a lower high, which basically means the Bitcoin bears, the ones selling Bitcoin, were stepping in at a much lower price rather than waiting towards 45,000. So technically speaking, this is our first signal on the daily time frame that is revealing some increased selling pressure. But other than that, like I just said, over the past 1.5 to 2 months, we've mostly been seeing higher lows form on the daily chart, which means the bulls are regaining some of their strength as we're seeing increased demand, which is basically people willing to step in and buy Bitcoin at some slightly higher prices rather than waiting to see those original January lows again. But if you're taking a look at the Bitcoin short positions on the Bitfinex exchange, something very interesting has just happened over the past 1 day. We've just seen a 3,650 Bitcoin increase to Bitcoin short positions on the Bitfinex exchange, which is the equivalent of selling over $140 million worth of Bitcoin. And for any of the beginners out there, all of this money right here is betting on the Bitcoin price going lower than it is today. But something important to mention is the fact that this is only on the 1-hour time frame. If I'm zooming out to the daily time frame, you can see that this increase over the past 1 day in the Bitcoin short positions just on the Bitfinex exchange isn't really that significant compared to what we've seen in the past. And what is very interesting is right now the short positions on this exchange are at the highest levels they've been at since July. And in fact, when you're looking at this time period right here, when we saw a lot of Bitcoin short positions on the Bitfinex exchange, that entire time period was between the end of May and the end of July. And if you're looking at that same time period on the chart where the Bitcoin short positions were at these very high levels, that was right around here on the Bitcoin chart. And obviously during that same time period in between the end of May and the end of July, the Bitcoin price was in its bottoming out phase after seeing a lot of fear in the market and a lot of bearish price action. And believe it or not, it is actually very common to have a lot of Bitcoin short positions open up towards the bottom of the market, just like how it's very common to have a lot of Bitcoin Bitcoin long positions to open up towards the top of the market. For example, this time period in the Bitcoin short positions on the Bitfinex exchange, where we saw the short positions at incredibly low levels, so a lot of people were obviously in long positions. That time period right there was at the end of October leading into the beginning of November. And if you're looking at that same time period on the Bitcoin chart, that was right here. You cannot make this up. So basically what we know according to history is when the Bitcoin short positions are at these record low levels, that is usually a good time to start thinking about possibly exiting the market or taking some profits at the very least. And then usually anytime we see a major spike in these short positions, when these short positions are at these very high levels, they almost always turn out to be a massive buying opportunity, especially for the longer term. And if you're looking at the percentage of Bitcoin short positions on the Binance exchange and the Bybit exchange, this data right here also backs this up. When the short positions are at these record high levels, usually that is happening at the same time as Bitcoin potentially bottoming out, basically when we're seeing a major buying opportunity. And then anytime we see the short positions at these record low levels over on Bybit and on Binance, usually that is happening when the Bitcoin price is actually topping out. And so if you're simply taking a look at these very high levels of Bitcoin short positions on all of these major exchanges right now, it becomes more clear as to what stage in the market we're potentially in right now. And what is very interesting is if you're zooming out to the 3-day Bitcoin chart and bringing out the Bollinger Bands indicator, after experiencing pretty much 2 months worth of sideways price action, we are now starting to see a squeeze in these 3-day Bollinger Bands. And for any of the beginners out there, this means that Bitcoin on the larger timeframes is either at a significant turning point or a significant point of inflection. An example of a significant turning point would be something like what we saw back in July, where Bitcoin went from a major downtrend into a lot of sideways price action and then a reversal back to the upside. And an example of a significant point of inflection would be something like what we saw in the middle of 2020 or like what we saw during September and October 2020. Basically, it acts as a trend continuation as the same trends that we were in before we saw the squeeze in the Bollinger Bands. We also saw a smaller example of this happening back in September, where Bitcoin was seeing a reversal back to the upside, and then we saw a shorter term correction, which resulted in a small squeeze in these Bollinger Bands on the larger timeframes like this 3-day chart. And then as soon as the Bitcoin price started to break back into the top half of these Bollinger Bands, that resulted in a continuation of this bullish trend until we saw our next squeeze in the Bollinger Band, which resulted in a reversal. And some key signals to look out for on the chart to help determine the next possible trend on the larger timeframes would be, first of all, support and resistance. So of course, if Bitcoin starts breaking above major resistance at around 45 to 46,000, that would clearly be a bullish signal, most likely resulting in a further recovery. But if the Bitcoin price starts breaking below the January lows, then clearly that would be a bearish signal. And in that case, it would be likely we'll see a continuation of a possible downtrend. And I would also pay attention to the Bitcoin price and the Bollinger Bands indicator to see what half of the Bollinger Band the Bitcoin price is sitting in. Because usually if the Bitcoin price makes a decisive break from, let's just say, the bottom half into the top half, that is clearly a bullish signal like what we saw in all of these examples. But then what we saw during April and May and also during November was the Bitcoin price see a decisive break into the lower half of these Bollinger Bands, both of these scenarios. And those were obviously bearish signals on the larger timeframes to pay attention to. But anyway, if you made it this far in the video, please make sure to leave a like down below. And if you're new to the channel, you might as well subscribe with notifications turned on for more updates just like this every single day. And of course, it is completely for free. And I also have a couple videos popping up right here on your screen for those of you that are interested in making more money in crypto, whether or not prices are going up or down. But anyway, that is it for this update. I really hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next video.